It was still dark when the first echoes of explosions rolled across the rocky hills of the Sahel. Villagers near the Mali-Burkina Faso border awoke to what they thought were the same frightening sounds of terror that had haunted their nights for years. But this time, it wasn't the terrorists striking. It was Burkina Faso striking back. On August the 13th, 2025, at precisely 4:23 in the morning, a silence that had hung heavy over this land was finally broken, not by fear, but by a thunderous victory. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's forces launched an operation that military analysts now call the most successful anti-terrorist campaign in Sahel history. 107 terrorists eliminated, 0 Burkinabè casualties, entire villages liberated, foreign funding networks exposed. For decades, Americans like you have been told that Africa could not protect itself, that only Western armies could bring stability to this region. But today the world has been proven wrong. Traoré's soldiers, armed with modern technology and guided by months of intelligence, accomplished in hours what foreign interventions failed to achieve in decades. This is not just another battle report. It is a moment that forces us to ask if African armies under their own command can defeat the very networks the West has struggled against. What does that mean for the future of global security? And more importantly, are we ready to accept that a young leader like Ibrahim Traoré may be delivering results that shock even his own supporters? Brothers and sisters, this is a story of liberation, courage, and proof that African sovereignty is no longer a dream. It is happening right now. Please share this video if you believe victories like this deserve to be known beyond Africa's borders, and subscribe if you know the truth matters more than the headlines. When history is written about the fight against terror in the Sahel, one date will stand apart: August 13th, 2025. In the pre-dawn darkness, while much of the world slept, Burkina Faso soldiers carried out an operation that many once thought impossible. Its name, Operation Cave Strike, has already become legendary. For months leading up to that morning, intelligence officers had quietly pieced together a disturbing puzzle. Reports from village defense forces hinted at unusual movements near the border. Shepherds whispered about trucks vanishing into the mountains. Russian satellites confirmed strange activity around hidden cave complexes. Chinese drone surveillance showed clusters of armed men hauling crates deep underground. Turkish electronic warfare specialists monitored encrypted chatter that revealed plans for coordinated attacks. Colonel Boubacar Sanfo, commander of the operation, later explained, "This was not luck. This was patience, precision, and preparation. We knew we had one chance to strike at the heart of their network." At exactly 4:23 a.m., the operation began. The sky above the Sahel, usually dotted with stars, was filled with the hum of Turkish TB2 drones. From high above, they painted a detailed picture of the cave system, every entrance, every sentry, every hidden stockpile. Unlike the noisy helicopters of old foreign interventions, these drones circled silently, unseen and undetected. Phase 1. Reconnaissance. For 72 hours before the strike, the drones provided real-time images tracking every movement. Commanders in Ouagadougou watched live feeds waiting for the perfect moment. Phase 2. Precision strikes. As dawn approached, Russian Ka-52 helicopters roared across the horizon. Their missiles struck with surgical accuracy, collapsing escape tunnels, igniting weapons depots, and sealing off exits. Terrorists who thought they were safe underground suddenly found themselves trapped. Phase 3. Ground assault. Then came the Burkinabè Special Forces elite units, trained in cave warfare by international partners, but commanded by African officers. With armored vehicles blocking escape routes, they stormed the entrances. Equipped with night vision gear, body armor, and modern rifles, they pushed deep into the caves. For the first time in living memory, the hunters became the hunted. Phase 4. Mop-up operations. Within hours, the firefight was over. The caves that once hid terror now echoed with silence. Every terrorist inside was neutralized. Not a single Burkinabè soldier was lost. When the dust settled, the numbers spoke louder than any speech. 107 terrorists eliminated, verified on site. 0 casualties among Burkina Faso's forces. A massive arsenal seized, including rocket launchers, heavy machine guns, and explosives not found on any local market. Foreign currency worth over $500,000 US. Dollars, euros, British pounds, Swiss francs, and UAE dirhams. Evidence of international backers funding chaos in the Sahel. Encrypted communication devices and laptops, revealing networks that stretched far beyond Africa. Colonel Adu Traore, Chief of Intelligence, summarized the gravity of the discovery. These weapons required state-level resources. These funds were not from villagers selling cattle. This was organized, deliberate, and international. Perhaps the most shocking evidence came not from the weapons, but from the captured documents and electronic devices. They revealed plans for simultaneous assaults on military bases in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. There were recruitment strategies targeting impoverished youth with cash payments and even links to political opposition groups hoping to exploit instability. One folder contained detailed maps of government facilities and schools, reminders of how close the region had been to catastrophe. Another revealed foreign phone numbers tied to known international financiers. For the first time, there was concrete proof terrorism in the Sahel was not just a local menace, but a network propped up by outside forces. By sunrise, the outcome was clear. What foreign armies had failed to achieve in years of interventions, Burkina Faso's own soldiers achieved in a single night. Entire cave networks once thought impenetrable were destroyed. Villagers who had lived in fear for years stepped out of their homes, some in tears, as soldiers secured their land. For many in the region, this was not just a victory, it was vindication. Proof that African armies properly trained, properly equipped, and led by leaders who believe in sovereignty could defeat enemies that once seemed invincible. As Defense Minister General Célestin Simpour declared later that day, this operation proves what Captain Ibrahim Traoré has been saying all along. African solutions to African problems are not slogans. They are reality. The caves fell silent, but what emerged from the darkness sent shockwaves across the continent. Soldiers lifted crates one after another, crates not of food or local weapons, but of advanced military hardware stamped with markings from factories far beyond Africa. Rocket-propelled grenades with serial numbers traced to overseas shipments. High-caliber machine guns unavailable in any local market. Plastic explosives manufactured with techniques requiring state-level laboratories. Alongside the weapons were bundles of crisp US dollars, freshly printed euros, and stacks of British pounds, more than $500,000 in foreign currency. Some bills were so new, analysts suggested they had been delivered only weeks earlier. In that moment, the fight against terror ceased to look like a local struggle. It was revealed as a battlefield for global influence with foreign hands pulling the strings. Colonel Adu Traoré, the intelligence chief, said with quiet gravity, "These are not the resources of poor young men hiding in caves. These are the fingerprints of international powers determined to keep Africa weak." For years, people across the Sahel whispered in fear about terrorists, how they seemed untouchable, always a step ahead, always supplied. But with Operation Cave Strike, the myth collapsed. 107 fighters lay defeated, 0 Burkinabè soldiers were lost. The message was unmistakable. No cave was too deep, no border too remote, no network too secret to escape African armies determined to defend their people. Dr. Fatou Kabore, a regional security analyst, later explained, this was not just a tactical win. It was a psychological earthquake. Terrorist groups now know they can be found cornered and destroyed. The panic among jihadist networks was immediate. Messages intercepted after the strike showed commanders ordering mass evacuations of other cave systems. Planned attacks on civilian convoys and military bases were abruptly canceled. Distrust spread within the network's fighters accused each other of betrayal, recruitment stalled, and desertion spiked. Within days, neighboring Mali and Niger launched parallel operations modeled after Cave Strike. Using shared intelligence and coordinated strategies, they too struck terrorist hideouts. In follow-up campaigns, 67 additional militants were eliminated and several border villages were secured. For the first time in decades, the Sahel witnessed a sense of joint momentum, African nations standing shoulder to shoulder, proving cooperation could deliver real security. Villagers who had long lived under the shadow of armed groups described the liberation in emotional terms. One local chief, Ibrahim Traoré, said President Traoré's soldiers came like lightning. They broke through the caves and suddenly the fear that ruled us for years was gone. Now our children go back to school. Our women return to the fields. Life has returned. Back in Ouagadougou, news of the operation spread like wildfire. Crowds poured into the streets waving flags, singing and chanting Traoré's name. Estimates say 2.3 million people gathered in the capital alone, while across Africa, cities from Lagos to Nairobi saw spontaneous demonstrations of support. Hashtags like Cave Strike Victory and Traoré Delivers dominated social media with billions of impressions within days. For older Africans who remembered decades of foreign interventions that often ended in disappointment, this was something new, an African-led victory free of Western boots on the ground achieved with African courage and intelligence. Global analysts scrambled to respond. Western media outlets accustomed to covering Africa in terms of crisis and failure struggled to explain how a young captain-turned-president had delivered a textbook military victory. Meanwhile, military experts in Washington and London privately admitted that such a flawless operation, zero casualties, total elimination of enemy forces, seizure of international intelligence, was rare even for their own forces. Colonel James Mitchell, a retired U.S. Special Forces officer, told one panel, "What Burkina Faso achieved in those caves would challenge any Western army in similar conditions. Their tactics, coordination, and execution were nothing short of remarkable. African leaders were far less reserved." Mali's Colonel Assimi Goïta declared, "This victory belongs to all Sahel peoples. It proves that our armies, united and equipped, can defeat any enemy." Niger's General Abdourahmane Tiani echoed him, calling cave strike the moment the Sahel turned the page on fear. Even South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa praised the strike, saying Burkina Faso has shown the continent that African solutions to African problems deliver real results. For years, young Africans had been told they must wait for international aid for foreign armies, for promises that rarely materialized. But as the dust of cave strike settled, a new reality dawned. They no longer had to wait. Under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, they had proof that Africa's sons and daughters could defend their own soil. This was the climax not just of a battle, but of a mindset. The caves once symbolized terror. Now they symbolized resilience. What began as a covert operation in the darkness ended in a continental celebration of light. When the smoke cleared over the caves of the Sahel, the first to feel the change were not soldiers or politicians, but villagers. In 12 communities long gripped by terror, people stepped out of hiding. For years, families had lived under curfews enforced not by governments, but by militants who dictated when children could walk to school and when farmers could work the fields. After cave strike, that iron grip dissolved overnight. Elders described the moment with tears. One chief, Ibrahim Traoré, recalled, "For too long we prayed for help that never came. Then in one night the soldiers returned our freedom. The sound of gunfire was not fear this time, it was deliverance. Schools reopened within days. Humanitarian trucks carrying food and medicine returned to villages that had been cut off for months. Women walked to wells without armed escorts. To ordinary, Burkinabè cave strike was not just a battle one, it was the return of normal life. Inside Ouagadougou, the political ripples were equally powerful. Critics of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who had long questioned whether his heavy investment in military modernization would yield results, suddenly found themselves silenced. Operation Cave Strike gave Traoré something rare in politics: undeniable proof. The numbers 107 terrorists eliminated, zero casualties, millions in foreign currency seized were unarguable. For the first time, opposition groups struggled to frame him as reckless. Instead, they faced growing suspicion after intelligence revealed attempts by terrorist financiers to link with political dissidents. Citizens began to ask dangerous questions. Were local politicians complicit? Had foreign actors found allies within Burkina Faso's elite? Traoré's government seized the moment to push for reforms aimed at dismantling corruption and tightening financial oversight. Across the Sahel, cave strike marked the birth of a new military doctrine. Mali and Niger quickly adapted the same strategy, joining forces with Burkina Faso in joint operations. Intelligence sharing, once hampered by mistrust, became the cornerstone of a regional security alliance. For ordinary citizens in these countries, the sight of coordinated victories restored confidence that the Sahel could stand on its own without waiting for Western intervention. This cooperation also deepened the significance of the Alliance of Sahel States AES, proving it was not just a diplomatic union, but a genuine defense pact. For decades, ECOWAS had been criticized as slow and ineffective. By contrast, the AES now looked dynamic and decisive. Cave strike became its first major demonstration of credibility. For years, villagers had whispered in fear about militants who seemed untouchable. Now it was the militants who whispered in fear about Burkinabè forces. Recruitment for jihadist networks collapsed as young men once tempted by easy cash saw the fate of those who joined. Parents who had once begged their sons not to leave for the bush now pointed to cave strike as proof you will not return alive if you join them. The morale shift was dramatic. Instead of citizens doubting their army, they celebrated it. Instead of terrorists claiming to be protectors, they were exposed as foreign-funded pawns. That change in perception, subtle but powerful, was perhaps the most enduring victory of all. Burkina Faso, long portrayed internationally as one of the poorest and most vulnerable nations, now carried itself differently. Cave Strike gave the country a new identity, a frontline state that could not only survive but prevail. Traore's message of African solutions for African problems no longer sounded like rhetoric, it became lived experience. On the streets of Ouagadougou, murals appeared overnight depicting soldiers emerging from caves with villagers behind them. School children practiced marching in improvised parades mimicking their new heroes. For the first time in generations, ordinary Burkinabè felt their nation was not simply enduring history, but shaping it. While African streets erupted in joy, Western newsrooms fell into uneasy silence. The same media that had covered African instability for decades struggled to frame a victory that did not fit their narrative. Some headlines reduced Operation Cave Strike to a local clash, avoiding the uncomfortable reality that a young African leader had accomplished what years of Western military presence could not. For Washington and Brussels, the implications were troubling. Billions of dollars had been poured into counterterrorism in the Sahel training programs, airstrikes, and foreign bases. Yet, in a single night, Burkina Faso, without Western boots on the ground, delivered a clean total victory. Strategists quietly admitted what they could not say publicly: if African-led forces proved effective, Western influence in the region would shrink. Among those who did speak were retired officers. Colonel James Mitchell, once a member of U.S. Special Forces, commented bluntly, "This was a flawless operation. 0 casualties, complete elimination of the enemy intelligence seized." To be honest, few Western units could pull this off in such terrain. His words echoed across American military forums, sparking debates about whether the U.S. had underestimated African capability. Beyond the West, Cave Strike was celebrated as a symbol of self-determination. From South Africa to India, commentators praised the operation as proof that the global South could chart its own path. Leaders in Latin America drew parallels with their own struggles for sovereignty, while Middle Eastern analysts noted the exposure of foreign financial networks tied to African terrorism. What made Operation Cave Strike so unsettling to Western powers was not just the body count of 107 terrorists, it was the philosophy behind it. No foreign soldiers commanded the mission. No Western advisors dictated tactics. The operation was purely African in planning, execution, and celebration. It embodied Traore's doctrine, African solutions for African problems. For older American viewers who lived through Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, the message was unmistakable. The costly wars that failed to bring stability abroad contrasted sharply with an African army's precise, decisive success. It raised uncomfortable questions. If Africa can now handle its own security, what role remains for America? By exposing foreign funding behind Sahel terrorism, Burkina Faso also turned the mirror back on the global system. Dollars, euros, and pounds found in those caves suggested that instability was not merely an African problem, it was an international business. That revelation cast doubt on the moral authority of Western governments, while boosting calls across Africa for tighter financial independence. As one South African commentator put it, Burkina Faso has done what the West refused to do: unmask the true source of chaos. In the eyes of many around the world, Operation Cave Strike was more than a battle. It was a turning point in global power narratives, where Africa proved it could no longer be dismissed as dependent. The story of Operation Cave Strike does not end in the silence of a conquered cave. It lives on in the voices of villagers who can now send their children to school, in the parades of young people waving flags in Ouagadougou, and in the quiet pride of soldiers who returned home alive. Yet history teaches us that every victory carries its warning. Terror networks may be in retreat today, but they are not gone. The seized laptops and encrypted devices revealed chilling plans, coordinated attacks across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, attempts to infiltrate governments and schemes to recruit youth across continents. Cave Strike broke their backbone, but the will of those who profit from Africa's instability will not vanish overnight. And so the question remains, will this victory be remembered as a single brilliant moment, or as the first step in Africa's permanent liberation from foreign interference and terrorism? That answer depends not only on Burkina Faso, but on all of us Africans and allies abroad who care about justice. For America's older generation watching now, perhaps you see the echo of wars fought far from home. You saw the toll of Vietnam. You witnessed the long grind of Iraq and Afghanistan. And now in the Sahel, you see something different, an African army succeeding on its own terms. No occupation, no endless foreign deployments, just sovereignty strategy and strength. It forces us to ask, do we still believe that only Western armies can bring security? Or are we ready to admit that nations like Burkina Faso are showing the world a new path? President Ibrahim Traoré promised African solutions for African problems. On August 13, 2025, he delivered on that promise with a clarity that shook both allies and adversaries. But the deeper question lingers, can we continue to trust him to carry this vision forward, or should Africa prepare for another leader to rise if he falters? This is where you, the viewer, come in. These stories are not just headlines, they are choices about the kind of world we will live in. If you believe that Operation Cave Strike proves Africa can secure its own future, share this video with your family and friends. If you feel proud to be among the first to know and support President Ibrahim Traoré, write in the comments, Africa's victory is our victory. And if you know the truth matters more than the headlines, subscribe now. Together, let us ensure that victories like Cave Strike are never hidden, never silenced, but celebrated as proof of what Africans and humanity can achieve. Because this is not just Burkina Faso's triumph. This is a warning to the world. Africa will no longer be a battlefield of foreign design. It will be a continent of its own destiny.